She was 22 years old, and the county had already decided what she was worth. Exactly nothing. Her stepfather, Alderman Graves, a man who kept 3 account books and trusted none of them, had made that calculation on the morning of her birthday with the same flat efficiency he used to assess a failing crop. She had been fed, housed, and tolerated for 6 years. That tenure was now concluded. He slid a bus ticket and $40 across the kitchen table and told her the arrangement had run its course. Her name was Lena Cott. She had her mother's eyes, her grandfather's stubbornness, and, wrapped in a square of canvas at the bottom of her bag, a hand plane that had belonged to Nola Hewitt, a woman who had spent 40 years making furniture in a shed behind the hardware store on Dillard Street, and who had, in the last 2 of those years, taught Lena everything she knew about reading the grain of wood. Nola was gone now, 8 months in the ground, and what she had left behind, the shed, the tools, the small name she had built, had been absorbed quietly into the hardware store's back inventory, settled by a nephew Lena had never met. What Lena had kept was the plane. It was a Stanley No. 4, its iron worn to a bright mirror from decades of use, its tote darkened by the oil of Nola's hands. It was not worth much to anyone else. To Lena, it was the only thing in her bag that had any weight at all. She took the bus west because west was the direction the ticket pointed. She had no plan beyond that, which is the honest truth of how most things begin. Settle in. Let us tell you what happened when she stopped. The town of Havelock, Wyoming did not announce itself. It appeared in the window of the bus as a cluster of low buildings against a vast gray-green plain, the kind of place you could look at for 30 seconds and feel you had already seen everything it had to offer. The bus stop was a bench outside a gas station. The driver set her bag on the gravel and pulled away without a word. She stood there for a moment in the particular silence of a place that has decided it no longer needs to impress anyone. The wind came across the flat in long, patient gusts, carrying the smell of sage and something faintly sweet she couldn't name. She had $63 left after the ticket. She had no contact here, no purpose. What she had was a small notice she'd torn from a community board at the last rest stop, printed on yellow paper and thumbtacked beneath a flyer for a missing dog. Estate sale. Saturday. Tools, furniture, and contents of the Harwick Mill outbuilding. Buyer removes. No reserve. It was Wednesday. She had 3 days, which felt like either very little or a great deal, depending on how you looked at it. She found a room above a laundromat for $12 a night. The woman who rented it to her was named Bess, and she had the manner of someone who had answered every question already and preferred not to answer it again. She pointed Lena to the room, the shared bathroom at the end of the hall, and the coffee maker in the kitchen that was available from 6 until 9. Then she left her to it. That night, Lena sat on the edge of the narrow bed with the hand plane on her knee. She did not unwrap it. She just held the canvas around it, feeling its weight, the way you might hold something you are not quite ready to look at directly. Nola Hewitt had pressed it into her hands on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 4 months before she died, when her arthritis had made the finer work impossible. "You'll need this more than I will," Nola had said, which was the kind of thing that sounds simple until it turns out to be the truest sentence someone ever said to you. Nola had been teaching her to read furniture. Not just how to make it, but how to read it. What the grain said about how a board had been sawn. What the wear on a chair leg said about how a household lived. She said furniture was a kind of language, written slowly over years, and that most people walked past it without hearing a word. Lena had listened. She had learned. And then Nola had died, and her stepfather had done his accounting. And here she was in a $12 room in Havelock, Wyoming, holding a dead woman's hand plane and trying to figure out what any of it was for. She fell asleep with the plane still on the bed beside her. The Harwick Mill outbuilding was half a mile from the edge of town, set back from a county road behind a rusted gate that no longer quite closed. The sale was still 2 days away. But Lena had walked out on Thursday morning because she needed something to look at besides the walls of the laundromat room. And because she had learned from Nola that if you wanted to understand something, you looked at it before anyone else showed up to tell you what it was. The outbuilding was a long, low structure, its siding weathered to the color of old bone. The main mill building beside it was boarded up, a hand-lettered sign on the door reading "Private No" in faded red paint. But the outbuilding's door was padlocked, not boarded, and through the gap at the bottom, she could see that the floor inside was wood, not concrete, and the wood was dry and pale, which meant whatever was in there had been kept off the ground. A man was sitting on an overturned crate near the gate, eating a sandwich with the focused attention of someone who has very few pleasures left. He was old and angular, with a face like cracked map leather, and he wore a canvas jacket that had been repaired at the elbows with a different color thread. He watched her approach without expression. "Sales Saturday," he said. "I know," Lena said. "I'm just looking. Nothing to see from out here." "I can see the door," she said, "and the condition of the siding, and that whoever built the outbuilding knew what they were doing, because it's still square after what looks like 70 years. He stopped chewing and looked at her with a different quality of attention. "You know buildings?" "Furniture," she said. "But it's the same principles." His name was Aubrey. He had worked the Harwick Mill for 22 years and had stayed on for 11 more after it closed because there was nowhere else he particularly wanted to be. He knew the outbuilding, the way you know a room you have walked through 10,000 times without ever needing to turn on a light. He told her the outbuilding had been used as a finishing room, where the mill's furniture pieces were stored before shipping. When the mill closed, the owner, a man named Harwick, long dead, had locked it and left instructions that it was not to be opened until the estate was settled. That settlement had apparently taken 31 years. "What's in it?" Lena asked. "Furniture," Aubrey said. "Or what's left of it. Has anyone looked inside?" The estate lawyer looked. "Once." He paused. "Said most of it was ruined. Water damage," he thought, "though I don't see how. The building's tight as a drum." He looked at the door, told the family it wasn't worth the cost of removal, and recommended selling it as is. Lena looked at the door too. There was something about the way he said it, the lawyer's quick dismissal, the 31 years of waiting, that made her think of Nola telling her that most people walk past furniture without hearing a word. "What's it listed for?" she asked. "Lot as a whole. Building contents, buyer removes." He shrugged. "Nobody's bid on it yet. They'll probably start at 50 and take 20. She had $63. "I might bid on it," she said. Aubrey looked at her, taking in her age, her single bag, her worn jacket. He did not say what he was thinking, which she appreciated. "Suit yourself," he said, and went back to his sandwich. She spent the rest of Thursday and all of Friday in a state of careful calculation. She walked the perimeter of the outbuilding 3 more times. She studied the roof, which showed no signs of patching. Whatever had been done to it had been done right the first time. She found, on the north wall, a small ventilation gap near the roofline, and through it, angling herself just right against the afternoon light, she could see the interior in a slant. Shapes. Rectangular shapes under canvas covers, straight lines, the profile of a chair back, the corner of what might be a cabinet. She thought about what Nola had told her about the mill. Harwick had been known, in its time, for a particular style of furniture. Solid, plain, made for people who didn't want decoration, just things that would last. The kind of furniture that had no fashion and therefore never went out of it. If the pieces inside were in any kind of condition, they were not worthless. But she had $63, and the bid might go higher. She sat in the laundromat below her room that evening and watched the dryers turn and thought about Nola Hewitt, who had built her entire business on the principle that other people's certainty about value was usually wrong. Nola had once bought a dining set from an estate sale for $8 because the sellers had decided it was too plain to bother with. She had cleaned it, repaired one leg joint, and sold it 6 months later for $400. Plain lasts, Nola always said. Plain is honest. People figure that out eventually. On Saturday morning, Lena arrived at the Harwick gate an hour before the sale started. There were perhaps 15 people in attendance, most of them older men, with the look of habitual auction-goers, patient and deliberate in the way of people who have learned that getting excited costs money. A woman from the estate lawyer's office stood beside a folding table with a clipboard and a card reader. The outbuilding contents were Lot 11, the last lot of the morning. The first 10 went quickly: old mill equipment, spare parts, a trailer load of lumber. When the auctioneer reached Lot 11, he gestured at the padlocked door with the mild disinterest of someone presenting an inconvenience. "Lot 11, he said. "Contents of the finishing room outbuilding, unknown condition. Buyer takes as, buyer removes. We'll start at 50. Silence. The habitual buyers looked at the door and looked away. One man started to raise his hand, then thought better of it. 50, anyone? 40 for the contents. Lena raised her hand. 40, she said. The auctioneer nodded. 40 from the young woman. Do I hear 45? Nobody did. 40 once, 40 twice. He banged his clipboard. Sold for $40. A few of the men near said nothing, which was its own kind of comment. The woman at the estate table handed her a receipt. Lena counted out 2 20s. She had $23 left to her name. She was now the owner of a locked-out building full of furniture that a lawyer had called worthless. in a town she had arrived in 4 days ago with no plan. She stood in front of the door with the padlock key in her hand and felt the same thing she imagined Nola had felt standing in front of every purchase no one else wanted. Not certainty exactly, but something adjacent to it. A kind of readiness. Aubrey appeared at her elbow. He had not bid on anything and had watched the whole sale with his arms folded. "You going to open it?" he asked. "I am," she said. "You'll need help moving whatever's in there." "I know." He considered this. "I've got a hand truck and a truck. Gas costs something. If there's anything worth selling, you get 10%, she said. He held out his hand and she shook it. The padlock opened on the second try. The door swung inward on hinges that were stiff but not broken. The smell that came out was the smell of enclosed time. Dry wood, old cloth, and the faint sweetness she had noticed out on the road and not been able to name. Now she recognized it. Beeswax. Someone had waxed everything before they sealed it up. The interior was long and narrow, lit by 2 high windows on the south wall that let in slanted bars of morning light. Along both walls and in a row down the center stood pieces of furniture under canvas dropcloths. Chairs, cabinets, tables. A tall clock case without its works. The canvas was gray with age but whole, and where the light caught the edges of the pieces beneath, she could see the clean, straight lines of Harwick's plain style. She lifted the nearest cloth. A side table. Cherry wood, she thought, though it was hard to tell in this light. She crouched and ran her thumb along the edge of the apron. The joint was tight, still tight after 30 years sealed in here. No swelling, no separation. The wax had kept the moisture out. The lawyer was wrong, she said quietly. Aubrey stood in the doorway, watching her move down the row, lifting cloths and setting them aside with a focused economy he hadn't expected from someone her age. "What do you mean?" he asked. He said water damage. "There's no water damage. The building is tight like you said, and somebody waxed every piece before it was stored. They knew what they were doing." She paused at a large cabinet, its doors still closed and latched. She opened them. Inside, on the shelves, were 4 more pieces, nested, padded with old newspaper. She lifted a page of newspaper and looked at the date. August 1993. "Someone locked this up in 1993, she said, and waxed it, and nested the smaller pieces inside the larger ones, and closed it up carefully. This wasn't abandoned. This was saved." Aubrey came inside then, stepping over the threshold for what might have been the first time in years. He looked at the cabinet, then at the date on the newspaper. Something crossed his face that she couldn't read entirely. Memory, she thought. The specific kind that has weight. "Harwick had a daughter," he said, after a moment. "Marion. She was the one who actually ran the finishing floor. Her father owned the mill, but she was the one who knew the work." He paused. When the mill closed, there was a dispute about the estate. Her father's brother, a man named Chet Harwick, claimed the business assets, including the inventory. Marion said he had no right to it. The pieces on the finishing floor were hers. She'd overseen every one of them. But she was a woman and he had lawyers, and the settlement went his way. He looked at the cabinet. "The estate sale today. That's Chet Harwick's estate. He never touched this building, never opened it. As far as he was concerned, it was a problem for someone else." Lena stood very still. "And Marion?" "Moved away. I don't know where." She looked at the cabinet, at the careful way the smaller pieces had been nested inside it, padded and protected. At the newspaper, dated August 1993. At the beeswax sealing every joint against 30 years of weather. Marion Harwick had not abandoned these pieces. She had preserved them. She had done the only thing available to her when the law had gone against her. She had locked the door and trusted that eventually someone would open it and know what they were looking at. Lena sat down on the floor of the outbuilding, which was something she hadn't planned to do, and looked at the hand plane in the canvas wrap she'd set on the nearest table when she came in. Nola Hewitt had given it to her and told her she'd need it more. She had not understood, at the time, that need could look like this. The work of the next 2 weeks was the most precise she had ever done. She and Aubrey moved the pieces out of the outbuilding one by one, loading them into his truck and bringing them to the empty bay of a garage he knew about on the edge of town, whose owner was willing to rent it for a small weekly fee. Lena cataloged every piece in a notebook she bought at the gas station. Dimensions, wood type, condition, the quality of the joinery. There were 41 pieces in all. 3 had some damage, minor splits where the wax had failed at a joint. The rest were in a condition that struck her as close to miraculous. She worked with her tools and with the hand plane, re-leveling surfaces where the wood had moved slightly over the decades, tightening the joints that had loosened, cleaning the wax, and reapplying it with a fresh coat of beeswax, she ordered from a woodworking supplier in Casper. Each piece that came back to full condition felt like a specific argument being won. Aubrey watched her work with the same expression he had worn at the estate sale, patient, reassessing. On the fourth day, he brought her a thermos of coffee and sat on a sawhorse while she fitted a chair leg. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked. "A woman named Nola Hewitt," she said, "back in Greeley. She made furniture for 40 years and taught me for 2 of them. She retired. She died." He was quiet for a moment. "She leave you much?" Lena considered the hand plane on the workbench beside her. "She left me the right things," she said. On the 9th day, Aubrey mentioned something he had said carefully once and then left alone. "Marion Harwick," he said. "I looked. She's in Laramie. She's 71. She teaches woodworking at a community center." A pause. "She doesn't know any of this happened." Lena set down her chisel. She had been thinking about this since the 3rd day, since the moment she had understood what the newspaper date meant, and what the wax meant, and who had done this careful, heartbroken work of preservation. She had been thinking about it the way you think about something you already know the answer to, but haven't said out loud yet. "We have to tell her," Lena said. "The pieces are yours," Aubrey said. "Legally, I know they are." She picked up the chisel again. "That's not the same thing as what's right." They drove to Laramie on a Thursday, which was when Marion Harwick taught her morning class. The community center was a low building near a park, with a woodworking shop in the back that smelled wonderfully of sawdust and linseed oil. Marion was at a bench with 3 students when they found her, demonstrating a dovetail joint with the offhand precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times and still found it interesting. She was a compact woman with white hair cut short and hands that told the same story as Nola's hands had. A lifetime of work, the kind that doesn't apologize for itself. When Aubrey said her name, she looked up with the neutral expression of someone who has learned to wait before reacting. Lena told her. All of it. The estate sale, the $40, the door, the date on the newspaper, the beeswax. She told her about Nola Hewitt too, because it felt necessary, because the 2 women's stories were the same story told 30 years apart, and Marion deserved to know that the person who opened her door understood what she had done and why. Marion Harwick stood with her hands flat on the workbench and listened without a word until Lena was finished. Then she was quiet for a long moment. "I waxed everything the night before the settlement hearing," she finally said. Her voice was even. "I knew how it was going to go. Chet had 3 lawyers and my father's signature on a document that I'm still not certain was witnessed properly. I waxed the pieces, and I locked the door, and I told myself that wood lasts if you treat it right." She paused. "I didn't expect it to last 31 years. "It did," Lena said. "All but 3 pieces, and those are repairable." Marion looked at her. "What do you want?" It was a direct question, asked without hostility, the question of a woman who had learned to ask it early. Lena had thought about the answer for 9 days. "I want to sell the pieces," she said. "The right way, through someone who knows their value and can place them with people who'll keep them. I want you to know about the money, and I want you to decide what part of it is yours. And I want," she paused, because this part was harder to say, "I want to know if you need an apprentice, because I'm in Havelock with no plan and $23. And what I have is a dead woman's hand plane and 2 years of the best education I've ever received, and I would rather learn from someone who knows what they're doing than find out the hard way what I don't know yet." Marion looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Aubrey, who raised his hand slightly in a gesture that meant "This is nothing to do with me." "You paid $40, Marion said. "Yes, for a building full of my work." "Yes, and you drove 2 hours to tell me about it." "Yes." Marion turned back to her workbench. She picked up the piece she'd been using for the demonstration and turned it over in her hands. Then she set it down. "The pieces," she said, "belong to both of us. Half the sale price is mine. Half is yours." She said it with the flat precision of someone settling a matter that should have been settled 30 years ago. As for the other thing, she did not look up. "I have been trying to find a second instructor for the Thursday morning class for 3 months. The pay is not impressive. The work is. Come back Monday and bring the plane. I want to see what she taught you." The pieces sold over the following 4 months, through a furniture dealer in Cheyenne, who specialized in American craft work, and who, when he saw what Lena had brought him, went through the catalog twice without saying anything, and then offered a number that made Aubrey sit down on the nearest chair. The money was divided as Marion had said, and what it meant for Lena was a used truck, a security deposit on a small rental on the edge of Laramie, and enough left over that the $40 she had spent in Havelock was no longer the terrifying last measure of a person who had run out of options. It was the first line of a different kind of accounting. She taught her first Thursday class in late November. 3 students, a retired electrician, a woman relearning a skill her grandmother had taught her, and a teenage boy who had been steered there by a school counselor and didn't yet know he was good at it. Lena stood at the front of the room and thought about Nola standing in the shed on Dillard Street, turning a chair leg in her hands, saying everything has a grain, there's no use fighting it. She thought about Marion locked out of her own work, doing the only thing left to her, preserving it and trusting in time. She thought about $40 and a padlocked door and what it means to see value where someone else has written off worth. She set a piece of white oak on the bench in front of her students and picked up the hand plane. Its iron caught the light. We're going to start, she said, with how to read a board before you touch it, because the work always begins before the work begins. Outside, the Wyoming winter was making its intentions clear, the sky pressing down flat and gray across the plain. But the shop was warm, and it smelled of clean wood, and the sound of the hand plane, when she made the first pass, was a long, clean whisper that could have meant almost anything. It was the best $40 she ever spent. And we hope that wherever you are, you've known something like that. A door that looked like nothing, a purchase that looked like foolishness, a person or a place that others had already written off. We hope you opened it anyway. For our question today, what is something or someone in your life that turned out to be worth far more than anyone else thought? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone. Until next time, stay close to the fire.